The goal of this video is to demonstrate how to get from a standard to a lesson. Let's start by looking at the California Physical Education Content Standards. Actually, the term standards is a little confusing. They are technically overarching standards. And we have 5 overarching standards. Overarching standards, they're common threads of understanding that run K to 12. They're far too broad for designing specific lessons. Standards, as we call them in California, come under the overarching standards, and they're specific statements of what students should learn at each grade level. In other states, these specific statements are called benchmarks, or if you're looking at our national standards, they're called grade level learning outcomes. We're going to work with overarching standard 3. Students assess and maintain a level of physical fitness to improve health and performance, and the 7th grade standard 3.5, participate in moderate to vigorous physical activity at a minimum of 4 days each week. There are 5 steps to get from the standard to learning sequence and lessons. And we'll go through each of the 5 steps. Step 1, unpack the standard. This is where you take a close look at the standard to identify what students should know and do to demonstrate that they have learned or achieved the standard. There are 3 steps to unpacking, and we will go through each of the 3 steps. Step 1 is circling the verb or verbs and then underlining the content. So 1 verb in this standard and 2 pieces of content that I've color-coded. Participate in moderate to vigorous physical activity and participate a minimum of 4 days each week. Step 2, put the content into boxes. So those 2 pieces of content are participate in moderate to vigorous physical activity, participate a minimum of 4 days each week. Step 3, break down the content into small learning blocks. So if we take the box participate in moderate to vigorous physical activity, these are the small learning blocks that students need to achieve in order to demonstrate they've learned that piece of content. And this is what will be used to design specific lessons. When the entire standard's unpacked, this is what it'll look like. So there's the standard. There are the 2 boxes of content, and here are the small learning blocks. Yours might look a little different. There's no right or wrong way to unpack a standard. The second step in planning for standards-based instruction is determine evidence of learning. Okay, so let's talk about the kind of evidence required for the summative assessment. This is the assessment at the end that will let you know whether or not students have achieved the entire standard. So what we do is we look at the verb in the standard, which is participate. The evidence that you will need is that students have participated. And there will be alignment if there's a match between the verb in the standard and the evidence that you get. The evidence that you're going to require for the formative assessments, that students have achieved those small learning blocks on the way towards learning the entire standard, that comes from the unpacking. And so there needs to be alignment from the verbs in the small learning blocks to the evidence that you get. So if you want students to describe the physical activity recommendations for children and adolescents, you need a description. And that's called alignment. So looking again at the unpacked standard, and the small learning blocks, you see the verbs are in each small learning block, and the evidence that you need will be aligned to these verbs, etc. And here I've just written out what I just said. So summative assessment, evidence that students participate in moderate to vigorous physical activity. For the formative assessments, they can describe the physical activity recommendations for adolescents. They can define these terms. They can use tools to define intensity, for example. Step 3 Select assessment tools. So the definition of an assessment tool, a method used to collect evidence of learning. You need to choose the kind of tool that will allow you to collect the evidence you need. For example, if the verb is define, the tool must ask students to provide a definition. Having students identify or list would not provide evidence they have learned to define the word. For me, I do step 2 and step 3 at the same time. So when I'm considering the kind of evidence they require, I'm also starting to think about the most appropriate tool that would help me to collect that evidence. Here's some sample assessment tools that I will be using in the learning sequence design from the standard. Teacher observation, compare answers, vocabulary sticks, 60 minutes, MVPA game, game show, log. The log will be my summative assessment. Step 4, determine instructional activities. Again, there must be alignment to the verbs in the standard or small learning blocks. So for the instructional activity, if the small learning block says use tools to determine intensity of activities, that's exactly what students will be doing. They'll be using the pacer with the talk test. And with this activity, students sing or talk while doing the pacer, and their partners indicate with fingers the intensity level of the runner. Other instructional activities I'll use, what, why, how, and that's where the teacher shares with students what they're learning, why they're learning it, and how they will know they've learned. Again, the MVPA puzzle, group talk, compare answers. I'll go through these in a little bit more detail in a minute. And the 60 minutes MVPA game. And you'll notice that some of these instructional activities are also assessment tools. Step 5, plan the learning sequence and lessons. So the learning sequence comes from the Unpacked standard, and for this particular one, I'm anticipating that it'll take 6 lessons, although it may take more, and that's entirely okay. Let's take a close look at what the first lesson in the learning sequence will look like. So this lesson will be designed to achieve these small learning blocks, these 3. So you'll see basically the students are having an opportunity to get familiar with the physical activity recommendations for children and adolescents, and they're going to be developing some vocabulary. So in lesson 1, we'll begin with the what, why, how instructional strategy. Then we will do the puzzle, group talk, compare answers activity, the 60 minutes MVPA game, vocabulary sticks. Now I'm not sure if there's going to be enough time for this, in which case I will scratch it and move it to the second lesson. We'll give it a try. And we'll finish up with partner talk. This is a poster I have up on the wall of my multipurpose room. And this part here, I fill in with washable marker here too. So I can wash it off at the end of lesson and put up something different for the next class. But this is for what, why, how. So it answers the question, what are we learning today? Today in lesson 1, we are learning the amount and kind of physical activity needed to be healthy. How will we know if we're successful? You have learned when you can define the terms intensity, light, moderate, vigorous, sedentary, resting heart rate, aerobic, and physical activity, and describe the physical activity recommendations. The poster doesn't cover why is this important, but I would take the time to explain that learning these things would help them, the students, be able to take care of their bodies and keep themselves healthy. For the first learning activity, I call it puzzle, group talk, and compare answers. Students are given one piece to a puzzle, and they must find the people with the other 3 pieces and put it together. Then they are to discuss what it says and try to come up with definitions for these terms: aerobic, moderate, vigorous, and physical activity. Finally, when they're prompted, they get to check their answers with those on the screen. And this is a picture of what the puzzle looks like. So these would be the answers, and they wouldn't be revealed until the students had a chance to come up with their own definitions. If you don't have a screen available, you can also just put this on a little poster paper. For the 60 minutes of MVPA game, students have a partner and they play another pair. They get 10 cards, which on one side have a moderate or vigorous activity, and on the opposite side, a sedentary or light activity. For example, one card would say swim practice on one side and sleep in on the other. There's 10 of these cards. So one team throws the cards up into the air, 52 card pickup style, and once they land, they look at what's facing up and they divide them into two piles. A pile of moderate or vigorous physical activity or light or sedentary. Now, each card represents 10 minutes. If they don't have 6 cards, say they have 5 cards, they would need to get 10 more minutes of activity. And to do that, they would do 10 virtual jump ropes, 5 seconds of plank, and 5 sit-ups. Now, if they needed 20 minutes of activity, they would do twice this. And after that's happened, then the other team gets the cards, and they throw them up in the air, and what lands is what the other team does. In order to prepare for the next activity, vocabulary sticks, I'd put this up on the screen and give the students a chance to study the definitions for all of the terms. And I'd leave it up there during the game for them to refer to. Vocabulary sticks is a relay activity. They would have an empty template at one end of the room, so these would be blank. The term would be there, but this would be empty. One at a time, they'd run to the opposite end of the room and they'd pick up a popsicle stick and bring it back and put it beside the correct term. So this one here, a little hard to see, but it says activities that do not increase energy expenditure substantially above the resting level, but when they come back, they would put it beside sedentary. And they continue until they have all 8. At the end of class, I'll call students in and have them sit with their partner. And I'll have them attempt to answer these questions with their partner. And this is to figure out if they've been successful or not. So I'll have them to try and define the terms: intensity, light, moderate, vigorous, sedentary, etc. And also try to explain to their partner what the physical activity recommendation is for adolescents. Now all this is done without them looking at the answers, which are on the wall. And then they'll indicate to me with a thumb up or down whether or not they thought they were successful in the lesson and learned what they needed to learn. Creating standards-based lessons is definitely a learning experience. It's a learning by doing experience. So I encourage you to take a standard and roll up your sleeves and get to work following the model that I've given. And if you need any additional information, a really good resource is the California Framework, and you can get that online if you don't have an actual copy. So good luck.